On the day that was supposed to mark one of the proudest milestones of my life, my entire world was flipped upside down. Graduation is supposed to be a celebration of years of hard work, sacrifice, and resilience. For most people, it means walking across that stage, receiving a diploma, and feeling the weight of accomplishment settle in. But for me, my graduation will always be remembered as the day my parents committed the most shocking betrayal I never saw coming. When I walked into my parents' house after the ceremony, still wearing my cap and gown, I expected hugs, photos, maybe even a small dinner to honor the moment. Instead, I noticed something was missing. The driveway, where my pride and joy usually sat shining in the sun, was empty. My 1969 Corvette Stingray, the car I had worked over 70-hour weeks for years to afford, wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe my dad had moved it inside the garage for safekeeping. But when I opened the garage door, my heart sank. No Corvette. Just their usual cars sitting there, looking so ordinary, so unremarkable. Confused, I rushed back inside. "Mom, where's my car?" I asked. Her answer will stay with me forever. She smirked, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Thanks to your car, our daughter is having the time of her life." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Our daughter? She meant my sister, Heather, my younger sister, who had always been given everything I was denied, my car. The one thing that symbolized my independence, my hard work, and my connection to my late grandfather had been sold, without my knowledge, without my permission, to fund Heather's latest whim. I felt my chest tighten. "You sold it?" I asked, my voice trembling between rage and disbelief. "Don't be so dramatic," my mother shot back. "Heather needed this opportunity. She's on a beautiful cruise right now with all her friends, finally, enjoying herself after such a stressful year. You make good money. You can buy another car." Another car? Did she not understand? That Corvette wasn't just metal and paint. It was years of blood, sweat, and tears. It was Saturday mornings in my grandfather's garage, learning about engines while other kids watched cartoons. It was 5 years of saying no to vacations, new clothes, and nights out with friends so that one day I could afford the dream I had carried since childhood. And they sold it for Heather's vacation. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the silence of the room. "Do you even know what you've done? Do you know what that car meant to me?" I asked. My dad finally looked up from his chair, guilt flickering across his face. "Vanessa, try to understand. Heather was going through a really rough time. All her friends were going on this cruise and she couldn't afford it. It would have devastated her to be left out." Their words felt like knives. They were justifying it, excusing it, minimizing it, as though I should feel bad for not sacrificing more for my sister, as if my years of sacrifice, my dreams, my hard work meant nothing compared to Heather's comfort. And then came the final blow. When I demanded to know how much they sold it for, my dad muttered a number that nearly knocked me off my feet. $50,000. $50,000? That car was worth at least $85,000. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had undersold my dream, rushed into a deal behind my back, and pocketed the money like it was theirs to take. My hands shook as I tried to process it all. Anger, grief, disbelief, it all collided at once, and the only thing I could think was, this isn't just unfair, this is theft. This is betrayal by the people who are supposed to protect me the most. In that moment, my graduation day stopped being a celebration. It became the beginning of a story I imagined I would live through, a story of betrayal, justice, and a shocking twist that would turn everything upside down. Long before I ever worked those exhausting 70-hour weeks, long before I could even drive, my love for cars was born in a place most kids would have found boring, my grandfather's garage. To me, it was a sacred space, filled with the smell of oil and grease, the sound of metal clinking against metal, and the magic of transformation as old, forgotten vehicles slowly came back to life under my grandfather's skilled hands. Every Saturday morning, when other children my age were glued to cartoons or running around playgrounds, I was sliding into my grandfather's rumbling old pickup truck, excited for the ritual we shared. He'd glance over with a grin and say, "Ready to get your hands dirty, Nessie?" He called me that, Nessie, his special nickname, and it made me feel like his chosen apprentice in a world no one else seemed to understand. Inside the garage, I wasn't just a little girl. I was his partner. He taught me to change oil, swap out spark plugs, identify engine parts, and most importantly, respect machines as though they had souls. "Cars aren't just metal and rubber, Nessie," he'd tell me, wiping his hands on an old rag. "They have personalities. They carry stories. They're part of us." I believed him completely, and I felt it most when he showed me his prized possession, a rally red 1969 Corvette Stingray. That car wasn't just beautiful, it was mesmerizing. The curves, the chrome, the way sunlight danced across the paint. When he turned the key and the engine purred to life, it was like music. I stood there, barely tall enough to see over the hood, and whispered a promise to myself. One day I'll own one exactly like this. That promise became a guiding star in my life. It wasn't about vanity or luxury. It was about connection. That Corvette became a symbol of everything I admired about my grandfather, his patience, his craftsmanship, his passion. Owning one wasn't just about fulfilling a dream. It was about honoring him, carrying forward what he had given me when the rest of the world dismissed my interests as unfeminine or weird. Because let me tell you, my parents never understood. While my grandfather cheered me on, they sighed in disappointment. My mother used to look at me with grease under my fingernails and shake her head. "Why can't you be interested in ballet or painting like other girls?" she'd say, as if my passion embarrassed her. My father would offer me a look of quiet confusion, but no encouragement. They didn't see cars as art or history or meaning. To them, it was just dirty work. And then there was Heather. My younger sister was everything they seemed to want in a daughter. Delicate, traditionally feminine, always interested in the right things. When she wanted ballet lessons, they enrolled her in the best studio without hesitation. When she wanted expensive clothes, they found the money. When she wanted a sweet 16 party, she got one with 50 guests, decorations, and gifts piled high. Me, when I asked for auto shop classes, I was told, "We can't afford extracurriculars." When my 16th birthday rolled around, I got a small cake and a card. The message was always the same. Heather deserved more. I deserved less. It hurt, of course, but it also fueled me. My grandfather was the only one who made me feel like I wasn't crazy for loving what I loved. He's the one who told me not to give up. "One day, Nessie," he'd say, patting the hood of the Corvette, "this kind of dream will carry you further than you think." When he passed away 2 years before I finally bought my Corvette, I felt like I'd lost the only person who truly believed in me. But the memory of those Saturdays, the grease-stained rags, the warmth of his laughter, the sparkle in his eyes when an engine finally roared back to life, stayed with me. So when I finally got behind the wheel of my own rally red 1969 Corvette Stingray, it wasn't just a purchase. It was a homecoming. It was fulfilling the vow I had made as a wide-eyed little girl in a dusty garage. It was driving with him in spirit, keeping a part of him alive with every mile. That's why when my parents dismissed it as just a car, they couldn't have been more wrong. They weren't just selling an object. They were selling a promise, a legacy, a piece of my soul. And that betrayal would cut deeper than they could ever imagine. To understand the weight of what my parents did, you have to understand the foundation it was built on, a lifetime of favoritism. For as long as I can remember, my sister Heather was the sun around which our household revolved, and I was the shadow that had to bend around her brightness. It wasn't that I hated her. In fact, when we were little, I adored her. I wanted to protect her, play with her, and share in her joy. But it didn't take long to notice how differently the two of us were treated. Heather could do no wrong, while I could rarely do right. When Heather wanted ballet lessons at 6 years old, the check was written without hesitation. "Of course, sweetheart," my mother cooed, enrolling her in the most expensive studio in town. When I asked to take auto shop classes at 12, Mom scoffed. "We can't afford extracurriculars this year." And that was that. The pattern continued through everything. Heather's closet overflowed with designer clothes, while mine was filled with hand-me-downs. For her 16th birthday, they threw her a lavish party. 50 guests, a DJ, and a tower of gifts. For mine, I got a cake and a card. When Heather graduated high school, she got a brand new car parked in the driveway with a bow on it. When I graduated, I got a lecture about student loans and some waived college application fees. And yet, and despite it all, I never blamed Heather. She didn't ask to be the golden child. The fault was with my parents, who constantly compared us, who made it clear, subtly and not so subtly, who they valued more. My mother's criticism stung the most. She couldn't understand why I wanted to hang around greasy garages when other girls were perfecting pirouettes. She would sigh, "Why can't you be more like Heather? She's graceful. She's feminine." To her, my passion for cars wasn't just unusual. It was wrong. My father wasn't as vocal, but the disappointment was written on his face every time I came home with dirt under my nails. Heather, on the other hand, lived in a world of constant validation. Every interest was encouraged, every hobby was funded, every need was met. It created a dynamic where she expected the world to bend in her favor, because at home, it always did. And me? I learned that if I wanted something, I had to fight for it. I had to work harder, longer, and smarter because nothing would be handed to me. In some ways, that made me stronger. It fueled the fire that pushed me to excel in school, juggle multiple jobs, and eventually earn a career in finance. But it also left scars. The quiet ache of knowing that no matter how hard I worked, my parents would always find a way to diminish it. The imbalance was so blatant that even extended family noticed. My Aunt Sylvia once told me during a holiday dinner, "Vanessa, you've always been so independent. You don't need as much as Heather does." It was framed as a compliment, but it was really an excuse. Because I was strong, I could be ignored. Because Heather was sensitive, she deserved everything. And Heather leaned into it. She learned that tears, sighs, and complaints were her currency. If she said she was stressed, she got sympathy. If I said I was stressed, I was told to toughen up. If she wanted help, the family rallied around her. If I wanted help, I was reminded that life is hard. This favoritism wasn't just about material things, it was about emotional validation. Heather was comforted, defended, and protected. I was pushed, dismissed, and overlooked. And over time, those roles became cemented. So when my parents sold my car, my dream car, to give Heather the life she wanted, it wasn't just a random act. It was the culmination of a pattern I had lived under my entire life. It was them saying, once again, Heather's happiness matters more than your dreams. But here's the thing. I had built my entire adult life on proving them wrong. While Heather leaned on my parents, I learned to stand alone. I put myself through college. I worked long hours. I saved every penny. And the Corvette wasn't just a car. It was proof that despite their lack of support, I had achieved something monumental on my own. And yet, in one decision, they tried to strip it away. They thought they could sell my dream and dismiss it as just a car, as if it was replaceable. They didn't realize they were selling the symbol of my strength, my independence, and my grandfather's legacy. That's why it cut so deep. Because it wasn't just about Heather. It was about every moment of unfairness, every dismissal, every time I was told I wasn't enough. Selling that car wasn't the beginning of betrayal. It was the climax of a story that had been building since childhood. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. For years, the image of that rally with 1969 Corvette Stingray lived in my mind like a distant star. Dazzling, motivating, but seemingly unreachable. While Heather floated through life, supported at every turn, I clawed my way forward, determined to make that childhood promise to myself come true. After graduating college, I landed a job at a prestigious investment bank in Chicago. On paper, it sounded glamorous, but in reality, it was grueling. I worked 70-hour weeks, often staying in the office until midnight only to return before sunrise. While my peers enjoyed happy hours, exotic vacations, and shopping trips, I brown-bagged lunches, split rent with 2 roommates, and funneled every spare dollar into a savings account marked for one goal: the Corvette. There were times I questioned my sanity, nights when my body ached, when exhaustion blurred the lines between weekdays and weekends. But I held on to the vision of that car, the way its curves had enchanted me as a child, the way my grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. Cars aren't just machines, Nessie. They carry stories. And I wanted my story to be one of grit and triumph. 5 years. That's how long I stayed disciplined. 5 years of sacrifices most people wouldn't notice. But I felt in every fiber of my being. No fancy coffee runs, no trendy clothes, no spontaneous trips. I said no to nearly everything except the essentials because I wasn't just saving money. I was proving a point, that I could achieve something monumental without my parents' help, without their validation. Then one day, the dream became real. I stumbled across a collector's listing in Wisconsin, a rally red 1969 Corvette Stingray, the exact year and model my grandfather had shown me decades earlier. The photos nearly brought me to tears, the polished paint gleaming, the chrome immaculate, the interior lovingly preserved. The price tag, $85,000, every penny I had saved. I hesitated for only a moment. That hesitation wasn't about the money, it was about the gravity of it. This wasn't just a purchase. This was a life milestone. This was me telling my younger self, the girl eating cold leftovers while Heather got new outfits, we did it. The day I drove it home, my hands trembled on the wheel. The engine's low growl filled my chest, vibrating through me like a heartbeat. I swear I felt my grandfather sitting beside me in the passenger seat, nodding proudly. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just a car. It was every missed party, every late night, every dollar saved. It was proof that my sacrifices had meaning, proof that my passion wasn't silly or unfeminine, proof that I could honor my grandfather's legacy. From that day forward, the Corvette wasn't just transportation. It was part of my identity. I babied it, storing it properly during harsh Chicago winters, driving it only on perfect days when the sky was clear and the roads were open. I polished it by hand, checked every detail, treated it like it was worth more than gold. And in my eyes, it was. It also brought love into my life. 6 months after buying it, I met James at a classic car show. He owned a replica of the same model, and our conversation flowed easily, sparked by shared passion. Unlike my parents, James understood. He never rolled his eyes when I spent weekends tinkering under the hood. He respected the sentimental value of the car and saw how much it represented for me. For the first time, I had a partner who shared not just my interests, but my respect for what that Corvette symbolized. Together, we built memories around it. Long drives along Lake Michigan, car meets where we swapped stories with other enthusiasts, quiet afternoons spent detailing every inch. For 2 years, that car was my joy, my freedom, my connection to the past, and my promise to the future. And then came the Tokyo trip, the biggest opportunity of my career. It should have been pure excitement, a chance to prove myself internationally. But instead, it became the moment I faced the biggest dilemma: how to protect the Corvette while I was gone for 3 long weeks. That's what led me back to my parents' driveway, Corvette gleaming as my dad admired it, and my mom made small talk. I asked them to store it safely in their garage, explaining every precaution. I trusted them, not because they'd earned it, but because I wanted to believe family would at least respect boundaries. I couldn't have known then that entrusting them with my dream would set the stage for the most devastating betrayal of my life. The Tokyo assignment came out of nowhere, and when my boss called me into her office to deliver the news, my mind instantly went into overdrive. For most people in my firm, being chosen to lead an international pitch would have been the highlight of their career. For me, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it also meant being away from home and away from my Corvette for 3 weeks. That car wasn't just a possession I could lock up and forget about. Chicago had been experiencing a rash of car break-ins, and leaving it unattended in my apartment garage wasn't an option. It was too valuable, too rare, too personal to risk. So I weighed my options. I considered renting a secure storage facility, but none of them gave me peace of mind. That's when the idea struck me. My parents. They lived in Glenview, a quiet suburban neighborhood with wide streets, trimmed lawns, and a sense of safety that Chicago could never provide. Their garage had space, and despite our complicated relationship, I trusted them at least with this one task, keeping the car safe. So the Thursday before my flight, I drove the Corvette down to their house. Dad was mowing the lawn when I pulled into the driveway, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pride when he paused, wiped his brow, and said, "Still a beauty. Your grandfather would be proud." Mom appeared at the door, drying her hands on a towel. "Vanessa, what a surprise. Are you staying for dinner?" she asked, her tone casual, almost indifferent, as though I hadn't just pulled up in the car that represented years of sacrifice. Over dinner, I explained the Tokyo trip, how huge it was, how the client was worth millions, how this could be the turning point in my career. Dad nodded, though I could tell the significance was lost on him. Mom worried about the length of the trip. 3 weeks, that's so long. Can't you come home for a weekend in between? She asked. I had to explain patiently that international business didn't work that way. When we moved the Corvette into their garage, I went over every instruction carefully with Dad. It needs to be started once a week and run for 15 minutes. Don't drive it. The insurance is complicated. Keep the custom cover on, and please, don't let anyone touch it. He frowned slightly. Vanessa, I know how to take care of a car. I'll treat it like it's made of gold. I wanted to believe him. This car means everything to me, I reminded him softly, hoping he understood the gravity of my trust. That night, Heather joined us for dinner. She had just started her first job as an administrative assistant and spent most of the evening sighing about how stressed she was. "All my friends are planning this amazing Mediterranean cruise," she moaned, "but I can't afford it on my salary. Life is so unfair." I bit my tongue. I remembered working 3 jobs during college without complaint. Mom, of course, chimed in with sympathetic noises. "Maybe Dad can help," she suggested. Dad muttered something non-committal about money being tight because of the kitchen renovation. As Heather whined about missing out on the cruise, I stared at my plate, resisting the urge to remind everyone of the years I went without vacations just to save for my car. Little did I know, her envy and self-pity would soon become the excuse my parents used to justify the unthinkable. Before leaving that night, I called James. We had discussed an extra layer of security, swapping cars. His replica Corvette looked nearly identical to mine, but it wasn't nearly as valuable. "I'll swing by tomorrow and make the switch," he said. "Your parents won't notice the difference, and your real Stingray will be safe in my garage." Relief washed over me. "You're the best," I told him. "I'll call you when I land in Tokyo." The next morning, I boarded my flight, feeling like everything was under control. The career opportunity of a lifetime was waiting for me in Japan. My Corvette would be safe with James. My parents, I thought, would surely respect the boundaries I had laid out. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this careful plan would unravel in ways I never could have imagined. And when I returned home, the betrayal waiting for me would change my family forever. The flight home from Tokyo felt endless. 13 hours in the air, my mind replaying every detail of the trip. The pitch, the handshake, the celebratory dinner where my boss hinted at a promotion. I should have been floating with pride. I had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal that could change the trajectory of my career. But what kept me going was the thought of slipping behind the wheel of my Corvette, hearing that familiar purr, and taking it for a long, open drive along Lake Michigan. When the taxi pulled into my parents' driveway, exhaustion melted into excitement. I craned my neck, expecting to see the familiar red curves of my Stingray gleaming in the sun. But the driveway was empty. The garage door was wide open, and inside sat my dad's sedan and my mom's SUV. My heart sank. Maybe they had moved it. Maybe Dad had taken my instructions too seriously and tucked it away somewhere else. I wheeled my suitcase up the walk and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Welcome home, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug. I barely hugged back, my mind still fixated on the missing Corvette. "How was your flight?" "Fine," I muttered, brushing past her. "Where's my car?" A flicker of something, defensiveness maybe, passed across her face before she busied herself with a plate of cookies. "Come inside first, you must be starving." I ignored the cookies. "Mom, where is my car?" Dad looked up from his recliner, his smile tight, not reaching his eyes. He cleared his throat. "Well, honey, something came up while you were gone." A knot formed in my stomach. What does that mean? Where is my car? Mom finally turned, her chin lifting in that familiar way she used whenever she was about to justify the unjustifiable. "Heather needed some help," she said firmly. "A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I blinked, uncomprehending. "What does that have to do with my car?" She smirked. "Thanks to your car, our daughter is having the time of her life." The words hit like a slap. "You sold my car?" The room tilted slightly, my legs threatening to give way. "Now, Vanessa," Dad started, his voice soothing, like he was explaining something reasonable to a child. Heather was going through such a rough time. All her friends were going on this Mediterranean cruise, and she was going to be left out. It would have devastated her. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and humorless. "So you sold my car?" "You can always buy another," Mom snapped. "You make good money. Heather needed this more than you needed a toy in the garage. She's networking, making connections for her career. You should be proud she's finally getting a chance." My hands shook as I tried to process the insanity of it all. That car wasn't just a car. It was 5 years of sacrifice. It was my connection to Grandpa. It was mine. You had no right. Dad glanced at Mom nervously, then admitted, "We told the buyer you authorized us to handle the sale." My jaw dropped. "You forged my signature? You lied?" "It's just a car, Vanessa," Mom said, her tone hardening. "Family comes first. Heather is your sister. She needed this." "And I don't matter? My hard work, my boundaries, my dreams, none of that matters?" I shouted. "You're being dramatic," she scoffed. "You've always been so materialistic." My voice cracked with fury. "How much did you sell it for?" Dad looked away. Finally, he muttered, 50,000. I gasped. 50? That car was worth 85. Do you have any idea how much you've stolen from me? "The buyer said it was fair," Dad mumbled. "We needed to move quickly before you came home." That confession hit me harder than anything else. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had deliberately rushed the sale knowing I would never agree. They knew exactly what they were doing. I stood there trembling, rage and grief colliding until it felt like I couldn't breathe. My parents, the people who should have protected me, who should have respected me, had committed theft against me. They hadn't just taken a car, they had taken my trust. And as Mom sneered, Heather's Instagram feed open on her phone, showing my sister posing on a cruise ship with cocktails and designer sunglasses, I realized this betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a choice to prioritize Heather's happiness over my dignity, my property, and my very identity. My voice was ice when I spoke again. "You think you sold my Corvette, but you've sold something far more valuable. You've sold my respect for you, and you'll regret it." What I didn't tell them in that moment was that they were about to regret it far sooner and far more deeply than they could ever imagine. For several minutes after the truth sank in, I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. My parents had just admitted they sold what they believed was my Corvette for a fraction of its worth. Heather was halfway across the world sipping cocktails on a luxury cruise while I was left choking on betrayal in my own childhood living room. And then, my phone buzzed. A text from James lit up the screen. "Just pulled up. Where's the Stingray?" At first, I almost ignored it, too overwhelmed by anger to process anything. But then, like a light flicking on in the darkness, something clicked in my brain. I remembered. The switch. James had swapped my authentic Corvette with his replica before I left for Tokyo. My lips curled into a laugh, at first small, then louder, until the sound filled the room. My parents stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Mom's eyes narrowed. "What's so funny about your sister's happiness?" she demanded. I turned to her, a strange calm washing over me. "You didn't sell my car," I said softly. Confusion spread across their faces. "What are you talking about?" Dad asked. "The Corvette you sold wasn't mine. It was James's replica." The color drained from both their faces instantly. Their smugness, their justifications, their defensiveness, all of it vanished in an instant, replaced by dawning horror. Right on cue, James walked into the room, his expression wary. I explained quickly. "Remember when we swapped the cars before I left? My real Corvette has been sitting in James's garage this entire time. The one you sold? That was his replica." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then James crossed his arms, his voice firm. "The car you sold wasn't worth $85,000. It wasn't even yours to sell. It was mine. And you forged documents, lied to a buyer, and pocketed money that doesn't belong to you." Mom's face crumpled. "But it looked exactly like Vanessa's. How were we supposed to know?" "That was the point," James snapped, "to keep her real car safe. But ignorance doesn't change what you did. You sold property you didn't own. That's fraud. That's theft." Dad's voice trembled. We could go to jail for this?" "Yes," I said flatly. "Auto theft over $20,000 is a felony in Illinois. Wire fraud, forgery, bashki, add it all up, and you're looking at up to 15 years. Mom collapsed into a chair, her dramatic sobs echoing through the room. Once upon a time, her tears would have guilted me into softening, but not anymore. Not after this. "You have to help us," she cried, clutching at me. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone." "Except me," I shot back. "You were perfectly fine hurting me." They stammered excuses about Heather's stress, her depression, how family helps family. But the words rang hollow. For years, they had used those phrases to cover favoritism, to excuse their double standards. Now, those same excuses had pushed them into criminal territory. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Vanessa Miller?" a male voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Peter Donovan. I recently purchased a 1969 Corvette Stingray from your parents. There seems to be a problem with the title transfer." My eyes locked on my parents, whose faces had gone ghostly pale. There it was, the other shoe dropping. Not only had they committed fraud, but now the buyer himself was on the line, already sensing something was wrong. I had two options: expose them immediately, letting the legal system swallow them whole, or buy time to figure out a way forward. "Mr. Donovan," I said carefully, my voice steady, "there has indeed been a misunderstanding. Could I call you back within the hour once I've sorted this out?" He agreed, and I hung up, my parents watching me with naked fear. I crossed my arms. "That was your buyer. He can't transfer the title because the car you sold wasn't mine. It belongs to James, which means you didn't just betray me. You dragged a stranger into your mess, too." Dad's voice cracked. "Vanessa, please. We never meant for this to go so far." I met his eyes coldly. "Intentions don't erase consequences. You wanted to sacrifice me for Heather's happiness. No, and you've put yourselves in a position where your freedom could be sacrificed instead." They looked at James then, realizing with dawning horror that their fate no longer rested in my hands alone. James's property, James's decision. He didn't flinch. The only way forward is to fix this. And believe me, you're going to. The power dynamic had shifted. For once, my parents weren't the ones controlling the narrative. They weren't the ones deciding whose dreams mattered and whose didn't. They had sold the wrong car, and in doing so, they had handed me and James the leverage they had always denied me. And I was determined to use it. The moment the truth sank in, that my parents had sold James's replica and not my authentic Corvette, the balance of power shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself or justify my choices. My parents were. They were the ones pleading, bargaining, desperate to undo what they had done. But betrayal doesn't dissolve with an apology, and their fear didn't erase the fact that they had committed multiple crimes. They begged me not to involve the authorities, but James and I knew this wasn't something we could sweep under the rug. There was a buyer out there who had handed over $50,000 for a car that wasn't legally theirs. Paperwork had been forged, signatures faked, and money wired. It was no longer just a family matter. The desperation in their eyes was almost pitiful. Mom clutched my arm, tears streaming down her face. "Vanessa, please. You can't let us go to jail. We'll do anything you ask." I pulled my arm away. "You should have thought about that before you sold something that wasn't yours." Dad's voice cracked. "We were just trying to help Heather. She was so upset, so depressed. We thought if she missed that cruise, she might spiral." I laughed bitterly. "So you stole from me, forged documents, lied to a stranger, all to make sure Heather didn't feel left out of a vacation. Do you even hear yourselves?" Before they could respond, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mom. "Your Aunt Sylvia says you're being selfish and ungrateful." Of course. The family rally. Whenever conflict arose, my parents had always known how to recruit allies, twisting the story until I was cast as the cold, unyielding one. Minutes later, my phone rang. Aunt Sylvia. I answered reluctantly. "Vanessa Marie," she began, using my first and middle name the way she always did when preparing to lecture me. "What is this nonsense I hear about you threatening to send your parents to jail over a car, after everything they've done for you?" I bit down hard on my tongue, keeping my voice steady. "Aunt Sylvia, they sold a car that wasn't theirs. They forged documents. They took $50,000 from a stranger under false pretenses. That isn't a misunderstanding. That's fraud. That's theft." She scoffed. "They were only trying to help Heather. Family helps family. And you've always been so independent, Vanessa. You don't need things the way Heather does." There it was again. The narrative I'd been trapped in my entire life. Because I was strong, I was expected to give up everything. Because Heather was sensitive, she was entitled to take whatever she wanted. "Family helps family," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Funny how that only seems to apply when I'm the one expected to sacrifice. By the time I hung up, my blood was boiling. I showed James the message chain, rolling my eyes. They're already spinning the story. Now I'm the villain for not forgiving them instantly. James shook his head. "Not everyone will see it for what it is. But you're not crazy, Vanessa. They crossed a line, a legal one." I needed to hear that because Aunt Sylvia's guilt trips had a way of seeping under my skin, but not this time. Later that evening, I called Uncle George, my grandfather's brother. If anyone would understand, it would be him, and I was right. The moment I explained what had happened, his voice erupted with outrage. "They did what? Sold James's car without permission? That's not just wrong, Vanessa. That's criminal. You have every right to be furious." His words felt like balm on an open wound. For once, someone in the family saw the situation for what it really was. Not a petty squabble, but a betrayal with real consequences. "Everyone else seems to think I should just forgive and forget because they're family," I admitted. "Family doesn't mean breaking the law," Uncle George said firmly, "and it certainly doesn't mean trampling over your boundaries. Your grandfather would be appalled if he knew what they had done." For the first time that day, I felt validated, supported. My parents had leaned on favoritism and manipulation for so long that they expected me to fold, but this time they had gone too far. Meanwhile, the desperation from my parents only deepened. They began calling non-stop, leaving frantic voicemails, and even showing up at my apartment unannounced. Their once composed, confident personas had crumbled into a mix of pleading and panic. "Vanessa, please," Mom begged one morning, her face streaked with tears. "We can't sleep, we can't eat. We'll do whatever it takes to fix this." But her words didn't move me, not the way they once might have. "You should have thought about the consequences before betraying me," I said coldly. "We know we made a mistake," Dad said, his voice breaking. "But prison? That would destroy us. Please, you can't let this happen." And there it was, the full circle. For decades, I had been the one begging for fairness, begging for recognition, begging not to be dismissed. Now they were the ones begging, and I had the power to decide whether mercy or justice would guide what happened next. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about James, about the buyer, about the law. Their actions had ripple effects that couldn't be smoothed over with excuses. The days that followed were a blur of arguments, phone calls, and confrontations. Family members took sides. Heather, still lounging on her cruise ship, dismissed the whole ordeal as Vanessa being dramatic. Aunt Sylvia continued her lectures. Uncle George offered his unwavering support. And my parents, they unraveled piece by piece as the reality of what they had done closed in on them. For the first time in my life, they weren't in control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to back down. By the time James and I sat down in our lawyer friend Alicia's office, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down like a storm cloud. I had gone from celebrating one of the biggest victories of my career to staring down the possibility of watching my parents face prison time. Alicia listened carefully as we explained, taking meticulous notes. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. "Let me make sure I have this right. Your parents sold James's car without his consent, forged documents, including your signature, and misrepresented the VIN to the buyer. They took $50,000 in electronic payment, correct?" I nodded, my stomach twisting. "That's grand theft auto, wire fraud, and forgery," she said plainly. "Each carries serious penalties. If charges are pressed, they could be facing up to 15 years in prison." The words hit like a slap. Mom and Dad in prison. As furious as I was, the thought left me hollow. James leaned forward. "What are our options?" Alicia outlined them clearly. Press criminal charges, turn everything over to the authorities, and let the legal system handle A. He'd pursue civil remedies, sue my parents for damages, and force repayment through the courts. Resolve it privately, negotiate restitution and a binding legal agreement, avoiding the authorities as long as the buyer was made whole. Her voice was calm, but her warning sharp. "Whatever path you take, the buyer is an innocent party. He paid for a car in good faith. That has to be resolved quickly, or he may contact the authorities himself." That innocent buyer was Peter Donovan, the man who had called me days earlier, confused by the title transfer. James and I both agreed. The next step had to be meeting him face to face. We arranged to meet Donovan at a neutral spot, a coffee shop halfway between Chicago and his home in Indianapolis. I'll never forget the look on his face when we walked in. He wasn't just annoyed, he was furious. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice rising as we explained the situation. "I bought a stolen car with forged documents?" "Technically, yes," I admitted, forcing myself to stay composed. "But you need to understand, it wasn't my car they sold. It belonged to James. You were misled as much as we were." "That doesn't change the fact that I wired $50,000 for what I thought was a legitimate sale," he snapped. "I've already registered it, insured it, and spent money making modifications. This is a disaster." James spoke calmly, his tone steady. "We want to make it right. We're prepared to refund the $50,000 plus an additional $5,000 for your trouble and expenses. In return, we'll need the car back immediately." Donovan leaned back, glaring at us. "And how do I know I'll see that money?" Because we'll put it in writing, I said quickly. A binding settlement agreement. You'll be made whole. But we need your cooperation to get the car returned. There was a long silence. Finally, Donovan nodded. Fine, but I want the money in my account before I release anything. It was reasonable. It was also a ticking clock, Nguyen. We presented the plan to my parents. Their relief at avoiding immediate legal charges was short-lived. $55,000? Mom gasped. Where are we supposed to get that? You mentioned a home equity loan, I reminded them coldly, or liquidate assets, but this is on you. Dad rubbed his temples. We don't have that much equity, maybe 40 at best. Not good enough, James said firmly. The buyer gets every penny back plus compensation. Otherwise, this goes straight to the police. Mom looked horrified. You're siding with him over your own family? I stared at her, my voice like ice. You stopped being just my family when you committed crimes. Right now, you're defendants who need to pay restitution. The fear in their eyes deepened, but for the first time, I saw understanding, too. They realized this wasn't going away with excuses or guilt trips. In the end, after days of tense negotiations, a plan was formed. My parents would take out a home equity loan for $40,000. Heather, who had finally been dragged off her cruise early, would contribute $10,000 from her savings. The remaining $5,000 would come from selling Mom's jewelry collection. James insisted on one final condition: a notarized, written apology. A document acknowledging what they had done, promising never to interfere with my property again, and laying out clear restitution terms. At first, Mom balked. An apology is one thing, but a notarized document? That's extreme. James didn't blink. Not as extreme as prison. In the end, they signed. Donovan received his refund and additional compensation, the replica Corvette was returned, and the immediate legal crisis was averted. But the damage ran deeper than money. My parents had been forced to face their actions in a way they never had before. For once, they weren't rescuing Heather at my expense. They were cleaning up her mess, and their own. And for the first time in my life, I felt the balance shift. For once, they weren't untouchable. For once, accountability had a seat at the table. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, difficult conversations, and the kind of emotional strain that leaves you drained long after the crisis itself has passed. My parents were scrambling to hold everything together, taking out a home equity loan, cashing in investments, and reluctantly parting with heirloom jewelry. Heather, dragged home from her cruise early, sulked through the entire ordeal, contributing the $10,000 only because she had no other choice. For the first time, the financial weight wasn't on me. It was on them, and it was long overdue. The most difficult part of the restitution wasn't the money. It was the accountability. James had insisted on the notarized apology, and I knew why. For years, apologies in my family had meant nothing. They were words said in the heat of guilt, quickly forgotten when the cycle of favoritism and dismissal resumed. This time had to be different. The day of the apology, the air was heavy with tension. We met at my apartment with Alicia present as a legal witness. My parents sat stiffly across from James and me, the document spread out on the table between us. Mom's hands trembled as she picked up the pen. "This seems so formal," she muttered. "That's the point," James replied evenly. "Formality is what keeps people accountable." For once, Dad didn't argue. He signed without a word, his face etched with exhaustion. Mom hesitated, her pride warring with her fear, before scrawling her name at the bottom. Alicia notarized it, stamping the paper with a sound that felt final, like a gavel coming down in court. Then came the words, the apology itself. Dad cleared his throat, his voice heavy. "We are truly sorry, James. What we did was wrong, illegal, and disrespectful. Wow, he betrayed your trust and Vanessa's. We have no excuse." Mom's lips quivered, but for once, she didn't try to soften the blame or twist the narrative. She stayed silent, her eyes glassy with tears. It was surreal. After years of hearing my parents dismiss my feelings as dramatic or materialistic, there it was in writing. Acknowledgement. Proof that I hadn't been crazy all along. But accountability didn't stop at words. The financial restitution was grueling for them. Dad picked up extra construction shifts on weekends. Mom sold her diamond rings, a painful blow to her vanity. Heather, who had always been shielded from real responsibility, drained her savings and was forced to move into a smaller apartment. For once, everyone had to feel the weight of consequences. The family meeting that followed was brutal but necessary. Heather alternated between self-pity and rage. "Why am I being punished? I didn't sell the car," she snapped. "No," I replied coolly. "But you manipulated Mom and Dad into thinking your happiness was more important than honesty, legality, or my boundaries. You're 24 years old, Heather, an adult. It's time you stop expecting the world to pay for your fun." Her face reddened, her eyes flashing. "You've always been jealous of me, because Mom and Dad love me more." The room went silent. Even our parents looked shocked. I spoke softly. "Do you really believe that? That they love you more?" Heather's shoulders slumped, her voice dropping. "They've always given me more, always protected me, always made things easier." "And look where that's gotten you," I said, not unkindly. "You can't support yourself. You expect other people to fix your problems. That isn't love, Heather. That's enabling." For once, Dad didn't rush to defend her. He sighed, his voice weary. "Vanessa's right. We thought we were protecting you, but all we did was keep you from earning how to stand on your own." That moment shifted everything. The years of denial, favoritism, and dismissal cracked, letting something raw and honest seep through. It didn't magically fix us, but it started something. A process of reckoning my family had avoided for decades. Over the following weeks, there were small but meaningful changes. My parents began attending family therapy. Heather started her first truly independent job, one she couldn't just quit or run from. Dad, surprisingly, began showing interest in my passion for cars. One evening, he even suggested buying my Uncle George's old pickup truck so we could restore it together. For the first time, he wanted to enter my world instead of forcing me into his. The restitution plan stretched their finances to the breaking point. But that was the point. Actions have consequences. And finally, my parents and Heather were forced to live by the rule they had ignored for so long. For me, the greatest resolution wasn't the money or even the safe return of James's replica. It was the boundaries. That notarized document was more than legal protection. It was a symbol that my voice mattered, that my property, my dreams, my sacrifices weren't disposable anymore. And every time I looked at that framed apology on James's wall, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that it had come to this. Relief that at last the cycle had been broken. My parents had always believed love meant shielding Heather and sacrificing me. But now, they were forced to learn what real love looked like. Accountability, respect, and the willingness to change. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt something I hadn't thought possible with them. Hope. 1 month after the chaos, I found myself sitting at my parents' dining room table for Sunday dinner. The atmosphere was unfamiliar, a mix of caution, humility, and something I hadn't felt in years: sincerity. My father placed a platter of grilled chicken on the table, his once soft hands now rough with calluses from the construction shifts he had picked up. Mom followed behind with a simple bowl of salad, her fingers bare where her diamond rings used to be. It was strange to see them stripped of their usual pride, their luxury, their sense of superiority. They looked smaller somehow, but also more real. Heather arrived late, as always, but this time she wasn't flaunting designer clothes or boasting about her latest indulgence. She walked in wearing modest business attire, her hair its natural color, and her voice calmer. She had started a new job at an advertising agency. Nothing glamorous, nothing cushy, but hers. For the first time, she seemed to understand that life didn't owe her a shortcut. Even James was there, sitting beside me, invited as an honored guest instead of the outsider my parents once treated him as. The meal began awkwardly, conversation limited to safe topics like the weather and neighborhood news. But gradually, the walls came down. Small gestures caught my attention. Dad asking Mom if she wanted more food instead of assuming. Mom pausing before speaking for Heather. Heather offering to clear plates without being asked. Little things, but things that had never happened before. Halfway through dinner, Dad cleared his throat. "I spoke to Uncle George yesterday," he said. "He's thinking of selling his old pickup truck. Says he's too old to keep fixing it up. I was thinking maybe I could buy it. And maybe—" His eyes flicked toward me, hesitant. "Maybe you and I could restore it together." The words nearly knocked the air out of me. For years, my father had dismissed my passion as silly or unfeminine. Now here he was, humbly asking to share it. It wasn't just about a truck. It was about connection. About finally stepping into my world instead of asking me to, abandon it. "I'd like that," I said softly, and I meant it. Mom had her own gesture. After dinner, she handed James a small gift bag. Inside was the framed title to his replica Corvette and a handwritten note. It read, "Boundaries matter. I promise never to cross them again." James looked up, surprised, but nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Diana. I appreciate this." It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was Mom acknowledging that her old habits, her constant intrusions, her excuses had to change. Even Heather, in her own way, was different. She asked me about work, genuinely asked. And when I told her about the Tokyo deal and my new promotion, she didn't roll her eyes or make it about herself. She said simply, "That's really impressive, Vanessa." And for once, I believed she meant it. Of course, not everything was magically healed. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. I still felt flashes of anger when I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the arrogance with which my parents had justified stealing from me. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a process, one that would take time. But sitting at that table, watching the small changes in how my family interacted, I realized something important. Sometimes the deepest fractures are what force people to confront the truth. Sometimes destruction clears the way for rebuilding. That car, my Corvette, had started as a childhood dream. Then it became a symbol of sacrifice, independence, and my bond with my grandfather. But after everything that had happened, it meant something even more. It had been the catalyst for change. Without that betrayal, my family might never have been forced to confront the favoritism, the entitlement, the lack of boundaries that had poisoned our relationships for decades. Driving home that night, James's hand resting gently over mine, I thought about my grandfather's words. "Cars aren't just machines, Nessie. They carry stories." He had been right all along. My Corvette wasn't just metal and rubber. It carried the story of my childhood, my struggle, my triumph, my heartbreak, and now, my family's attempt at redemption. The next morning, I took it out for a drive along Lake Michigan. The engine purred like it always had, but I felt different, stronger, more at peace. I realized that standing up for myself didn't mean abandoning my family. It meant loving them enough to demand respect, to refuse to let dysfunction go unchallenged. The road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Old habits die hard and there would be setbacks. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had proven to myself, and to them, that I was worth protecting, worth respecting. And that, more than any car, was priceless.